हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। आज हम क्लास 9 के हिस्ट्री चैप्टर नंबर 5 पेस्टोरलिस्ट इन द मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड के 3 मार्क्स के क्वेश्चंस देखेंगे। विच कंडीशंस आर रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर द डेथ ऑफ पेस्टोरल एनिमल्स इन द सेमी एरिड रीजन्स ऑफ साउथ अफ्रीका? हाई टेम्परेचर combines with low rainfall. It creates conditions which are dry and extremely hot. Drought conditions are common in the semi-arid land of equatorial heat. During such times, pastoral animals die in large numbers. Who are nomad pastoralists? Nomad pastoralists are the people who move from one place to another place for their livelihood. They move with their herds of camel, cattle, sheep, and goat. They always move seasonally from their native place to new grazing or pasture land. How pastoralists are important in India? Pastoralists help in the maintenance of ecological balance. Pastoralist होगा, keep a large number of cattle wealth, which is very helpful for the social economic development of the country. Pastoralists help in forest management. They also provide manure to the fields. Write any 3 points related to the activities of Dhangars of Maharashtra. Dhangars are one of the nomad pastoralists living in India. They are one of them who live in plains and plateaus. They live in the central plateau of Maharashtra during monsoon season. Actually, they are shepherds, but some of them are blanket weavers. By October, they move towards the Konkan. Question number 5. What are the factors that affect the pastoral movement in plains? There are many factors which affect the pastoral movement in plains. Their movement is not like the mountain nomad pastoralist. They move according to the time of advancing monsoon and retreating monsoon. In the dry season, they move towards the main area and return back at the arrival of the monsoon. ये मैप वर्क है। आप देखिए फेमस ट्राइब्स दैट लिव्ड इन द एरिया ऑफ नॉर्थ वेस्ट अफ्रीका का ये और नेशनल पार्क आपको मार्क करना है। तो मूर्स ट्राइब और आप वो कर सकते हो, ठीक है। सेरेंगेटी नेशनल पार्क, सोमाली, सी का आंसर होगा ए प्लेस वेयर सोमाली अफ्रीकन ट्राइब लिव्ड, ठीक है। यहाँ पर सोमाली का दे दिया। Where does Raikas survive in the desert? Rajasthan is an area of scanty rainfall. Raikas are pastoralist tribe of Rajasthan. Their rainfall is uncertain and meager. The Raikas live in a combination of cultivation and pastoralism. When dry season arrives, they move towards the new grazing lands and return back before the arrival of monsoon. How did the colonial rule affect the life of pastoralists? Their grazing land was converted into reserves of cultivated land. Their movement was restricted and many tribes were listed as criminal tribes. Pastoralists were forced to pay tax on animals. Their pastoral activities were restricted. Who are Maasais? Maasais are the pastoral community of Africa. They live in East African nations Kenya and Tanzania. They are cattle herder and always move from one place to another with their herds in search of new grazing lands. How did the colonialism affect the life of Maasais? The partitions of Maasai land into British Kenya and German Tanzania restricted their movement. New white settlers control over 60% of the Maasai grazing land. As a result, their best grazing lands were lost. The colonial powers encouraged the farmers to bring more areas under cultivation. The farmers began to dominate Maasai community economically and politically. How did drought affect the pastoralists in Africa? Droughts made a severe effect on the pastoral tribes. When rain is less and pastures are dry, pastoral move to new grazing lands, but the colonial powers restricted their movement to a small area. They were forced to live in a semi-arid areas. During the drought period, a large number of cattle used to die due to starvation and diseases. Okay, ये मैप वर्क है, आप देख लेना. What were the instructions given to the police to check the movement of pastoralists in the colonial Africa? The police were given instructions to keep a watch on the movements of pastoralists and prevent them from entering white areas. Passes to enter the territory should not be given to these native unless exceptional circumstances necessitate their entering. Ordinary visiting passes should not be given to the locals. How pastorals were treated by the colonial powers? Colonial power made many restrictions on their movement. Pastoral tribes were forced to live in the fixed areas. They were not permitted to go out of the reserves without permits. Pastoral communities were not permitted to enter in the white areas. Colonial powers considered them dangerous and wild. What were the positive impacts of colonialism on pastoral communities? The traditional authorities of the elders went to the new appointed chiefs. The new chiefs gathered wealth. Now they were able to purchase animals, goods, and land. They started to live a settled life. They began to live in towns and started trade activities. How the pastoral have survived in the modern times? Their grazing lands were disappeared. Their number of cattle was reduced, but still they have adapted themselves in new situations. They have changed the path of their cyclical movements as Raikas have done in India, now came to Haryana instead of Sindh. How did the Westland rule change the life of pastoralists? Britishers wanted to increase the production of food grains and commercial crops to meet the requirement of England. All types of uncultivated land were unproductive or wasteland for them. So Westland rules were made applied in various parts of India. Westland rules empowered them to acquire uncultivated land and was distributed among the selected individuals. Many of these individuals were elevated to the post of headman. ये मैप है आप देखना. What do you know about the camel fair of Balotra in Rajasthan? It takes place at the Balotra in western Rajasthan. A camel herder come to the fair to sell and buy camels. The Maru Raikas also display their expertise in training their camels. Horses from Gujarat are also brought for sale at this fair. How did the Forest Acts change the life of pastoralists? In the 19th century, many forest acts were made by the British. The Forest Act 1878 classified the forest into three categories: reserve, protected, and village forest. Pastoralists were severely affected by the acts. Their movement were restricted. How did the grazing tax change the lives of pastoralists? The British tried to discourage nomad tribes in all possible ways. Grazing tax was one of such measures adopted by the colonial power. They wanted to increase revenue income, so grazing tax were imposed on many items, including grazing land. The tax on grazing land was a step to discourage nomadism. Pastoral tribes had to pay tax on every animal they grazed on the pastures. Why were forest lands considered as wasteland? To the colonial governments, forest lands or uncultivated lands were wasteland as these did not yield agricultural produce or any other revenue. They considered these lands into cultivate land, and wasteland rules were enacted in mid-19th century in various parts of the country. How did the Criminal Tribes Act rule change the life of pastoralists? The British were always suspicious of nomadic tribes as the nomads were never settled on a particular place. The colonial power considered them criminal. Therefore, the Criminal Tribes Act was passed in 1871. By this act, many nomad tribes were classified as criminal tribes. These tribes were forced to live in notified villages. Their movement was restricted and they were always kept under strict surveillance. What conditions are responsible for the death of pastoral animals in the semi-arid regions of South Africa? High temperature combines with low rainfall. It creates conditions which are dry and extremely hot. Drought conditions are common in the semi-arid land of equatorial heat. During such times, pastoral animals die in large numbers. Can you explain the social life of Golas of Mysore according to Buchanan? Buchanan traveled through Mysore and wrote about Golas. Their families live in small villages near the skirt of the woods, where they cultivate a little ground and keep some of their cattle, selling in the towns they produce of dairy. Their families are very numerous, 7 to 8 young men in each being common. 2 or 3 of these attend the flocks in the woods, while the remainder cultivate their fields and supply the towns with firewood with the straw for thatch. What are reserve forests and protected forests? Reserve forests, the forests which produce commercially valuable timber like deodar or sal. No pastoralist was allowed to access this forest. Protected forest. In this forest, some customary grazing rights of pastoralists were granted, but their movements were strictly restricted. How did drought affect the pastoralists in Africa? Drought made a severe effect on the pastoral tribes. When the rain is less and pastures are dry, pastoral moved to new grazing lands, but the colonial powers restricted their movement to a small area. They were forced to live in the semi-arid areas. During the drought period, a large number of cattle used to die due to starvation and disease. What were the instructions given to the police to check the movement of pastoralists in the colonial Africa? The police were given instructions to keep a watch on the movements of pastoralists and prevent them from entering white areas. Passes to enter the territory should not be given to these natives unless exceptional circumstances necessitate their entering. Ordinary visitors passes should not be given to the locals. ये भी एक मैप है, आप देखेंगे. ओके, लॉन्ग आंसर्स में 5 मार्क्स के आंसर्स में नेक्स्ट वीडियो में करूँगी. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वॉचिंग. प्लीज़ लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब.